towards Western democracies. On March 2nd of this month, Recep Erdogan, Prime Minister of Turkey, stated that soon the numbers of refugees entering Europe's borders will be in the millions.
Yeah.
And with all this as a backdrop, you might recall that a few years ago, Viktor Orban, Hungarian Prime Minister, in 2015, stated that if Greece could not defend its border with Turkey from the influx of refugees, then other nations must request that Greece allow them to assist them to defend their territorial integrity.
Yeah.
My question is, could this emerging refugee crisis at Greece's border and Turkey's truculence concerning mass migratory reprisals, you think it could set up events where Vladimir Putin could be invited by, say, Greece or Bosnia or other country to step in militarily to protect Southern Europe from mass migration waves crossing over from Turkey? Is it possible that Vladimir Putin sees himself as Europe's savior?
Well, excellent question. And, we've already seen some of that. Remember the kerfuffle in Georgia. Look at the intervention in Crimea just a few years ago. I know the world seems to forget these things, but those were also justified as necessary to protect with the thinnest veil of permission from the sovereign state. And Ukraine's a sovereign state, right? As was Georgia. So yes, absolutely. And you can see Russia's demographic decline plays into this too. Look at how they have thwarted U.S. policy in Iran and in Syria, and yes, throughout the region. And part of that, let's go back to demographics in Russia. That's the second revisionist power. When Putin took over, maybe 8-10 years ago, he said we're going to spend $770 million on military, and we're going to increase our military. But he doesn't have the healthy 18-year-olds to do that because of the dire situation of just basic health care, maternal health care, children being born with musculoskeletal problems, a rampant TB problem without the resources, a high incidence of drug-resistant TB. These are basic health concerns, and of course we've heard about the problem with alcoholism and other things, have left Russia with a very high mortality rate. I mean, they're dying a decade before their counterparts in Europe. If you're a man, a 15-year-old in Russia today, you're expected to only live to be about 52 years old, maybe 53 years old. This is the same as some of the most poor developing countries in Africa. That's the situation. And for women, it's not that much better, frankly, if you look at their mortality. And so what does this do? They started having population decline, absolute population decline in the late 80s or early 90s. So they're really ahead of the curve, even beyond where Japan was. And so what has Russia done? Well, one thing you've identified, and that is this foray into basically encircling the near abroad, as they did during the Soviet time. And energy is a big piece of that too, if you look at their energy policy toward Eastern Central Europe and Europe proper. But you also look at what Russia has done with technology. Some people say, well, come on now, why doesn't technology make up for the lack of human beings in factories or whatnot? You look at what Japan is doing with technology. Well, yes, but technology can also be very destabilizing. Look at the way Russia has lowered its nuclear threshold, the threshold at which it's willing to use nuclear weapons, because it doesn't have the bodies to protect its Far East. If you look at some of the military exercises they've done there over the last decade, you'll see that the threshold at which they use tactical nukes has been lowered because they just don't have the people to protect the border. And so again, going back to this idea of demographics being a strategic issue, yes, I do think that you're onto something there. I do think you'll see Russia even more interventionist in the future because of this. Right.
And if you look at World Bank statistics in 2017, this was I think the most recent year that I had for Syria, because Syria is in a state of governmental dysfunction because of the ongoing civil war. But in any case, in 2017, Syria had 2.8 children per woman. Mm-hmm. Greece, which is a country that Syria and other countries in the Middle East stream into, also a NATO member, had has 1.4 births per woman. This was in 2017. Turkey at that time, this 3 years prior, had 2.1 births per woman in 2017. So, you think that we're seeing an ongoing, as we see this ongoing European birth dearth, that it's creating, political immigration dynamics that could destroy Europe itself because of the fact that there's a tremendous draw to have consumers. There's a tremendous draw to have employees and workers in entry-level positions because the babies simply aren't being born. The babies aren't entering the children aren't entering middle school. They're not entering into high school. They're not entering the workforce. Is this a type of dynamic that could, basically destroy European identity, do you think? Is that too controversial to ask?
No, I don't think it's controversial at all. I think that this is a question on everyone's mind, especially Europeans. Look, from an American point of view, why should we care? Because these are our closest allies, and they have been since the end of the Second World War, and we need them. The United States cannot be the world's policeman. Europeans have been our partners keeping the peace in the Middle East and Africa, in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Look, they have been our partners. They have shed blood. They have been beside us, and we need to continue to treat them like members of our family. So yes, we do care what's happening in Europe, and the same goes with Japan and South Korea. But getting back to Europe, look, immigration is not a problem per se. And in fact, immigration has been the lifeblood of the United States. If you look at our robust birth rate, what has made us exceptional in the United States is not just our birth rate, which is more robust than our allies and our foes. It is our immigration, but not just the numbers. It is the way we integrate. We are the only developed country to integrate, the only great power to integrate our immigrants well. And what does that mean? We have a common understanding of who we are and the rule of law and what it is to be an American. We have done that so well that I argue we just take that for granted. And that is why we fight so fiercely on immigration in Washington, that and partisan politics, obviously. But Europe has not done immigration well. They don't do immigration well. Look at Paris. They have a history of putting immigrants into, what in the old days we called ghettos, and allow their immigrants in Paris and beyond to take care of their own policing, for example, set up shadow governments, for example, and not to share the identity of the country. And this has caused real problems. Witness what has happened recently with terrorism. Germany recognized a generation ago that they would need to integrate immigrants, especially Kurdish immigrants and other immigrants, into their economy to build their human capital. And that was wise. The problem, of course, becomes into the integration. So yes, I think that when you look at what's happening on the borders, now you're looking specifically at the numbers flowing in as refugees. Look, it's not the people themselves that's the issue. Yes, we do worry about terrorists in their midst and making sure that the people who come in are coming in because they're legitimately fleeing economic and security disasters. But yes, they could rebuild human capital. What is human capital? It's not just the working age population, but it also has to do with health, education, and other things that build capital, like technology that's available, etc. Yes, they could do that, and we want to see them do that. How do they do that? Well, that's, of course, has to be done by each sovereign country. When you look at the way Turkey seems to be holding us hostage, for example, saying that we will allow these we will keep these refugees here, and they already have how many refugees? 4 million. But they're also looking for European aid to keep them. And I know that some see this as a sort of blackmail of sorts. But again, you can be an optimist or a pessimist when it comes to human capital. These are each individual people, each yearning to live and breathe free. To the extent that we can help our European partners learn to do immigration well, we should. And then I don't know if you want to talk about closing borders in Hungary, for example.
That's a good topic. That's a very important topic.
Yeah.
And by the way, and just let me state parenthetically, maybe you're going to say it already, Doctor, but the Eastern European countries that have been very, very averse to allowing immigration from Syria and the Mideast are in a really, really severe population decline, aren't they? Could you just make a little digression about
Which
that?
countries?
Hungary, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Poland, Romania. How are they doing in terms of demographics?
Well, so let's talk about Hungary. Hungary is a very controversial country. It's got a right-wing government. It's seen as ultra-conservative, but they're doing some things right, and that is they're focusing on family formation. They're one of those countries that has recognized the fact that they're below replacement fertility, and it's unsustainable, and they're not going to be able to grow and maintain their national identity without bodies, babies, families. And so what they've done in that country is extraordinary. They have a minister Caitlin Novak, who has taken on family policy beyond what the surrounding countries have done and really invested in things like, women, not just empowering women in the workplace, but also empowering them to have flexibility in the workplace and have quality care for their children. Now, of course, the Americans criticize this because it's state run, and we don't like any kind of things like childcare that are state run. But of course, this is a former communist country that it's very used to. They've gotten used to that kind of system, so we sort of forgive them that and hope that it's transient. But they have had the proof in the pudding is numbers, and they have been able to increase their total fertility rate beyond what the neighboring countries have done, and that is extraordinary. And so now what we see is that they're exporting these ideas to some of their partner countries. I know that they've been very active here in the United States, in Washington, D.C. in particular. I've spoken a few times at their family events here in Washington, and they've had big conventions in Budapest, bringing in experts around the world in family-friendly policies. So you have to give Hungary some credit. Yeah. When it comes to their border, they realize that while they're trying to build back up their nation, they're also carrying out to the letter of the law the agreement to keep the borders focused on legal immigration only. So they have been pretty rigid about making sure that immigration has been legal from the East. They see themselves as a gateway to Europe. They see themselves as a strong partner with their European allies in keeping illegal immigration to a minimum. And that too is controversial in an age where the human flow is as great as any time in recorded history. So they're a very interesting case to look at.
Sure. And what is it? Well, the latest figures. What do they tell us about their rate of reproduction per woman?
That's a great. They're not at a replacement birth rate by any means, but they've been able to reverse it. And I can.
Are they 1.7, 1.8?
Let's see. So it looks like they are at about 1.5 total fertility rate, which is an increase up from about 1.2 from what I'm seeing here. Your figures might be different. But no, it looks like they've been, yeah. 2014 was 1.4. Yeah, so I'm not sure what it is today.
That's okay, that's fine. No, but it's an important topic to discuss, and it brings me to my last question. What can be done to restore replacement levels in Western populations, and can we build on Hungary's
So it looks like they're 1.49 in 2016, so about 1.5. That's actually a very significant increase. And what's significant is that no country that's gone below 1.5 has ever gone back to replacement, which is 2.1. And we've seen some countries in Europe, France and Sweden, for example, who are actually higher now than the United States, which is at 1.77. But no country's been able to sustain a replacement fertility after dipping below 1.5. So again, all our eyes are kind of on Hungary to see if they can pull this off. Controversial as their means seem. So sorry.
Well, what can be done? I mean, is there? I have a sense that the old saw is that as countries become more educated, and their populations become more educated, then then families tend to have less children. So, what can be done? Is there any variation on that can serve as a model, or can serve as, let's say, a country to study a little bit more to see how they've been able to balance modernity and education, post-secondary education with a stable and let's say buoyant population growth.
So if you look historically, it was large populations that spurred economic growth in Europe. It was having large families that was the engine that Europe used to propel it through the Industrial Revolution into what we call now developed country. So it's not a given that what they call the demographic dividend, fewer children, giving you more money to spend on other things, right? Which is what this idea is, fewer children, fewer expenses, more money to put back in the economy, more time to work. And that we saw in the Asian tigers, right? The Asian tigers, we saw the decrease in fertility, and then we saw the economic boom. But what we know now is that was the exception to the rule. That same dip in fertility was worldwide. We saw it in Iran, we saw it in Syria, we saw it in Latin America, and those countries did not get the economic boom that the Asian tigers did. So it's I would just caution trying to link dipping fertility or rising fertility to economic development per se, because the history is that you need workers, and this is what we're seeing in Africa now, especially since the global economy is transitioned from a manufacturing economy to a service economy. The Africans are getting the short end of the stick because they are facing a service economy, and they have all this manpower, right? So they're not going to have the same global economy to translate their robust workforce the way that the Asians did. So what can we do? Well, I would say it's not also a given that rich people don't have babies. If you look in France and Sweden, it's the rich people having babies. If you look,
is that right?
I look at the UN and I see the wealthy diplomats, and they're the ones with the 6 and 8 kids. But it's funny.
Is that right?
Yeah, but I'll tell you, when it comes to changing a nation's demographic profile, you have to go beyond what works at the family or local level. To change a nation's profile, you need to go beyond 2 children to 3 children, and 3 children is considered a large family. In Europe today, and even in the United States, 3 is considered large. Like in my day, large was like 7 or 8, right? But not so anymore. And the problem, of course, is we like to talk about ideal family size, and we ask couples, well, what's your ideal family size? And let's help you get there. Let's give you childcare so that you can go to work and also have your ideal family size. Well, the problem, of course, is when you ask people what their ideal family size, like they did in Austria one year, and 40% of the men said it's 0 children. So getting people to their ideal family size, wow, when the norms have changed, for example, in Taiwan, it changed a generation ago. You don't see a lot of children around, you stop wanting children. And we see this in China now. The latest reports from China say that you have all these singles of working age who just don't want kids. They're too much trouble. They don't have enough time to spend with friends or spending money. So it's a norm. So keep that in mind too. I'm interested in this when I look at women, peace, and security, because the White House has launched this new initiative called the Women Global Development and Prosperity. And the idea is to get women into the workforce. That's all well and good, to get women into the workforce. And they want to spend $1 billion in the next 5 years on this. And but it cannot be a strategic project if you're not looking at the ramifications for women's well-being in the long run, what the economy is going to look like for those children and their grandchildren. And that means if you're pushing fertility down even farther, that's not going to be the peaceful society that you're looking for. So I would say be careful of ideal family size. Generally speaking, we should allow couples to have the number that they want. And usually that number is more than they have. The ideal family size for a lot of couples, actually, for women in particular, is more than what they have. So that's, I think, where the family-friendly policies, and again, look at Hungary and try to see what they're doing, because they've tackled this on a small scale. So beyond that, I think we
Wait,
need,
wait.
please go ahead.
No, I want to ask you, there's something, this is somewhat related, at least in the United States, context of the United States and our society. It's common to hear about a boy crisis. It's common to hear about a crisis of unsuccessful males. And one of the facets of that has been that now more women than men, I think, are going to college, graduate programs, PhDs, and so the women complain. I mean, this is anecdotal. But women complain there's not enough suitable marriage material out there. So I think it is a factor to keep in mind. And of course, a lot of women pursuing success many times will put off marriage and childbearing. And of course, that means when they do get married, it's not quite as easy to have a family because the rationale is, and this is male or female, if you're a man and you get a PhD or you get a master's degree in chemical engineering, you just say, wow, I just spent $200,000. I better make this pay off. I can't get married, So, of course, that happens with women as well. And of course, as time goes by, for women especially, higher infertility sets in, and less likelihood of having a family that has that profile of let's say, replacement of 2.1 or beyond. So.
Right.
Any thoughts about that? That's not an easy situation to solve for a demographer like you, but golly, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I am Exhibit A. I was married at the age of 40 after I got my PhD, and I had a 20-year career in the Navy, flying helicopters out in the Pacific. I deployed quite often. I did not want to have children and then deploy. That was, my way that I wanted to have a family was to be with my children. So I waited until I was in my 40s to get married and had my first child at 44. So yes, it does decrease the number of children that you can end up having if this is the case. And in fact, when you look at the U.S. Census Bureau's statistics, the only cohort having more children these days is women over 40.
It's amazing.
Yeah, but women's fertility peaks
more than 30?
What's that?
More than 30 to 40, more than, let's say, 30 to 39?
Over 40.
The birth rate?
The over 40 crowd is having, they're having an increase of what they were having before. Women are having them much later. They're pushing it off. So when you look at the numbers in the United States, which have been declining since 2008 at the recession, family sizes went down. We were about at replacement. We were about at 2.0 to even a little more than that. That was pretty extraordinary in 2008. But then in the recession, we started having fewer children. People were worried, no doubt. And that has not bounced back. Now, with the coronavirus, you've got people spending a lot of time together. We'll see what happens. We could have a baby boomlet. You could have people making babies right now. It's because they're sequestered in their houses. This has happened in history. We look at history and we see events where...
Tell us about that. Dr. Yoshihara, tell us a few cases.
No,
this is kind of interesting.
There are cases in Germany when they won the World Cup. All of a sudden, they had this baby boomlet 9 months later. I mean, look, the point is this. Optimism breeds babies. People want to be optimistic about the future. They want to be optimistic about the economic future, and they want to be optimistic about the moral future. I mean, people want to believe that bringing people into a good place. Well, look, that's not. We have to stop thinking globally, I think, in some ways, and we need to start thinking locally. Find a neighborhood that you like to live in and make it a wonderful place for your children. And you don't have to solve all of the problems in the world to have a happy family. And I think that maybe, again, look at what's happening with the coronavirus. You in Peru, you're in lockdown after 8 p.m. We just found out that our schools are closed until the rest of the school year. That's 3 months that we're going to be homeschooling our children. I have an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old. Yeah. So I think the norms are ripe to be shifting, and we're going to be looking at this very, very closely at what happens to norms. But Phil Longman, who has done probably the most cutting edge work on demography. He's always at least 10 years ahead of everybody else. He identified the birth dearth in Europe before everybody else. And he identified the way that it was religious people having more children. In the United States, it's Christians in the South and Southwest having more children. And in Europe, it's religious people, various religions having more children. Why is that? He ties that to norms. Look, they're more optimistic. They have some reason beyond the physical to go through what it takes, the suffering of childbirth, the sacrifice and self-sacrifice it takes to get married and stay married. Then more sacrifice, financial and personal, to raise children. And he rightly argued that that's normative. Now, it's not just religious norms. It could also be national norms. I mean, there are plenty of folks who might be having more children who are not religious. But there is something that compels us, something. And I think that needs to be reignited in our societies. I do. And in some pockets, it is being reignited. And the portrayal, I think the Hollywood portrayal of marriage as a trap and families as violent, while it might be true in some places, is really over exacerbated. I see it at the United Nations all the time. When I mention families, inevitably there's some UN bureaucrat who will say, oh, don't forget families are violent and a bad place for women. It's like a mantra. But I think we really need to pull back and start to remember we all came from a family. It might not have been perfect. It might have been awful, but that doesn't mean that families in the future, ours in particular, can't be quite a wonderful place.
Yeah, sure. And then, there's also something this is also a question that comes to mind because of my own personal experience, and that is that I sense that military recruiters have a very, very hard job. A very hard job. I give you an example. My son's a Marine. I was in the Navy ROTC unit for 1 year at Holy Cross. And so I really met some great people. And so I called the unit, and I spoke to the Marine captain there. And very nice. And then the naval officer called me back, and very interesting because I was asking about my son, about the possibility of him maybe transitioning to an officer candidate school, as he's a lance corporal. And there was a lot of very, very genuine interest on their part. They're doing yeoman's work, if you can call it that, at trying to see if that could be matched up. And when I talk to some of the recruiters in some parts of the country, it's very, very hard. It's so bad that there's it's to put it like this: some of the Marine recruiters are under intense career-killing pressure to meet quotas.
Yeah.
And this all gets back to a question I wanted to ask about the impact of globalism, the impact of offshoring industry, and what possible contributory effect that has had on low-income wages, dearth of jobs, situations of drug abuse, et cetera, and how that's going to impact the U.S. military. Can you want to comment on that? Is that maybe it's something I kind of blindsided you, Doctor? I don't want to do that.
No, quite all right.
I was very kind. Since you have a naval background and an officer, I thought I'd interestingly ask that question.
Well, if you read my book, Population Decline and the Remaking of Great Power Politics, that I wrote the chapter on the United States, and I interviewed many recruiters across the board.
Really?
For that. Yeah, I talked to a lot of recruiters, and I talked to them, and honestly, recruiters in the United States still have the pick of the litter as far as competing with industry writ large. We still have a highly educated population. We are the most educated population in the world. We have the highest number of patents. We have the highest number of graduate, postgraduate educated workers. We are extraordinary in our exceptionalism. That doesn't necessarily translate into GDP, and there are reasons for that. We had a 10% drop in working age population. We expect, by 2040. So yes, we've talked about that. We have 40% of our children born out of wedlock, and this has caused problems with health, as you pointed out, more susceptible to things like drug abuse, more susceptible to unemployment and more time in between employment. And that has to do with not having stable two-parent families. When you look at our competitors, however, the United States will have an increase of 3% in its recruitable youth for the foreseeable future, right? While our allies, Japan, will see a retraction of 22% of recruitable youth. Germany and
wait, over how much time, Doctor?
Till 2040.
By 2040, they'll see a decrease.
A decrease in the next 20 years of recruitable youth by 20% in
This
Germany.
is like a comparative thing.
And we are increasing. So in other words, we are still reaping our past benefit before 2008. We have what we call population momentum, right? There's a momentum of the number of educated youth that are recruitable. Now, what's the quality? Where do they come from? What family were they raised in? How's their health? These are the things that we worry about. And I think that's, again, why we fight so hard on things like healthcare. And when we look at the mix of our demographics, where we come from, what socioeconomic backgrounds and ethnic backgrounds we come from, that too the recruiters really think about. They do. They think about the longevity of a recruit and how long they're going to last. Obesity has become a problem in recruit age youth. Obesity is a real problem in the United States, and it's decreased. In other words, it's really slimmed down that margin of the perfect recruit, right? As you've said. And norms have changed. I hear recruiters telling me that norms have changed. It used to be pretty simple for someone. I joined the Navy in 1982 when I was 17. And, we all had kind of similar values. The year I was born, 1964, we were at the height of marital stability in this country. After 64, marriage fell off precipitously into divorce rates and broken families. And so we were pretty homogenous in my cohort. Stealing and lying, those were pretty clear cut. Nobody really argued. These days, there's a lot of dispute of what actually constitutes stealing and lying and things like that. And so we spend a lot of our time creating, again, going back to norms, going back to what a nation is. We spend a lot of time building characters and forming these into units with a very diverse population. Diverse not just in ethnic and sex, etc., but diverse in our norms, where we've come from, because we have a more secular society than we've had in any time in history, right? The rise of the nuns, they call it, N-O-N-E-S, the rise of those people who, when you look at a religion, you check off none, which simply means that there is not that common sort of set of values. So recruiters have it, they have it tough. My niece is a recruiter here in Washington, D.C. She works at headquarters. And so I get to hear the vignettes of what she's dealing with recruit age youth. But again,
what did she say? Is that no, you don't want to share that?
No, but I think you've touched on it. Well, I think we're looking pretty darn good. I think we Americans tend to navel gaze, and we tend to look at what's wrong because we want to be the best, and we are. I think, though, especially look at the coronavirus, you have to be optimistic when you realize the level of ingenuity and technical medical know-how, the investments that we have made in the last 2 generations in healthcare in this country and research and development is extraordinary. And so while we're fighting here in Washington, right down the street from me over this next stimulus bill, we really need to be hopeful. And I think demographics is part of that. It's based on optimism. We Americans are very optimistic, and I don't see any reason to change that. And I'm not being a Pollyanna. I think the numbers are clear. And what I would recommend to U.S. policymakers, invest in those families, invest in that optimism, and stop investing the billions of dollars in making other countries decrease their family size, and take the page from our own history book and reinvest that money in things like maternal health, which, golly, if Russia hadn't that, they wouldn't be in dire straits right now. Reinvest all the money we put into these population programs into health and building human capital. And then I think you'll see a change in the next 20 years.
There's a thought that comes to mind, and that is the impact on on fertility that high taxation has. Would you care to comment? I mean, New York State, New York City in particular, I'm from New York, has, of course, the federal income tax, the state income tax, and the city income tax.
Yep.
And do you see within the United States borders? Do you see any different types of trends or signs of health from looking at low taxation states versus high taxation states? Is it discernible? Do you get anything?
And which is first, the chicken or the egg? Because it's the voters who vote for those, right? So is it the large family states that vote for family-friendly policies, and then the urbanized, not so friendly states that vote for other things, right? It's chicken and egg. But and I'm not an expert in at the municipal level or even at the state level,
right.
I mean, global level. So you'd have to probably talk to somebody who looks at taxation and fertility more closely. But yes, there is. Look, right now in coronavirus, they're talking about giving us $3,000 for a family of 4. That's a big deal for some families. A lot of these families I just talk to every day. Maybe the woman's an Uber driver. She drives in the morning. She's got 4 kids and a baby at home. Her husband works afternoons. She's not able to work as much. He's not working right now because of the economic shocks of this latest pandemic. But $3,000 would be huge to her. And so we kind of lose sight of the difference that taxation makes because we're talking about thousands of dollars. Yeah. And the child exception is in the thousands. And sometimes we think we're talking in the margins, but not for working families. So I would fully expect to see that kind of correlation.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, good. Well, Doctor, tell me, are you right now currently writing any books? Is there something that's going to be coming out soon?
I am. I'm writing a book. Yes, thank you for asking. I am writing a book. Actually, this is going to be a different type of book. I'm writing a book about flying. My days as a search and rescue helicopter pilot in the Pacific, out on the islands of the Pacific. It's filled with stories about what it's like to be a woman in the 80s where there are no other women out there with you. And it's also a story about the heroism of my fellow squadron mates as we flew search and rescue, went through the Gulf War, and some of these other stories. So stay tuned for that book. Working on that manuscript now.
Great. That's, something, you went into the U.S. Navy. Did you go in as an E1? Or I went to college first and become an officer? I thought you just became an officer and went in the flying school.
I went in at 17. I went into Annapolis, at the Naval Academy in Annapolis.
Oh, that's right, of course. Yeah, you graduated. That's correct, yes.
Yep, and from there I went to flight school, was sent out to the Pacific in the 80s. I deployed with the battle group out there, the aircraft carrier, and then in the Gulf War I was with the amphibious, what they call the amphibious ready group. And then I had many other tours after that. But basically, my focus now is to write those great flying stories. But I also served on the combatant commander staff. I served here in Washington as a White House fellow. The Navy, in its folly, sent me through graduate school a few times, so they overeducated me, and then I went down and I taught on the faculty of the Naval War College, where I taught international relations and strategic leadership and national security. And so this new organization that I have founded, you can find us at wpscouncil.org. We are the American Council on Women, Peace, and Security, and we are looking at 2 things, women's leadership role in national security, international security, and also protection of women in crisis and conflict. So protection of women from all kinds of violence. Women and children are increasingly prone with the types of wars we see today, terrorism, non-state actors. Increasingly, women are victims, and so are their children, from violence, sexual violence, and also we help in their response, their relief, their recovery, and turning them into leaders and teachers for the rest of us. And in so doing, to make more peaceful societies. And really what we focus on at the council is how women are different. How women bring something different to the table, how we are uniquely capable in certain areas, and how we complement men's role in leadership in warfighting.
That's for another interview. That like very much.
I look forward to coming back. We can talk about that. We can talk about flying. We can talk about anything you want.
Great. And then, yes, and when you have that book, we want to interview you specifically about the book. So
Great.
great. Well, Dr. Yoshihara.